Even Simon Sinek says, find your why. And I feel this whole idea of finding your why is even more important in mania. I feel mania actually allows us to find and connect with our why. One of my whys was people are suffering, and there's homeless people out there, and there shouldn't be homeless people. And so, and also violence against women and children. And so I didn't have to find my why, it found me. And that's another thing with mania, is there's so many aspects to it that people are trying to search for and implement in their life by reading books and taking workshops. And then somebody that goes into mania or manic consciousness is gifted all of that, but usually they fall on their face at some point, and then all the gift part that is kind of far removed is forgotten about. And that's why I think it's important to harvest one's mania. So if somebody falls on their face, gets up, takes wellness recovery action plan, takes bipolar in order, and different courses in order to get some function back. Once a person gets a function back, it's important to go back and harvest one's mania for the why. Why did I make it through that? Why am I here on earth? Why did the universe kick my ass and now I'm kind of back standing? What am I going to do with the information that the universe gave me, that state, that experience gave me? How can I harvest that to step into what I am here to do on earth, my cause, my why? And so many of us are lacking meaning in our life, and mania gives us that. Not only that, the state of mania I actually feel is close to a flow state. I feel it's actually an enhanced flow state, in that a person can be in flow in daily life. They don't actually have to be surfing a wave. They're surfing the wave of the universe, the wave of that energy, and that's putting a person in flow without having to think, these are the 5 steps to flow, or these are the things I have to do. No, this person who has this propensity to go into this consciousness has no choice. There is no choice, and in that way there's focus because there's no choice. So that's why I'm saying it's important to get with what it was that was the vision in that state, because it's going to come back. And even if a person has a sense of control over those energies, it's important to be able to thrive. And I feel that the most powerful way to thrive is with whatever the cause, whatever the why was that you connected with in that state, because that was a message, that was a special message. So not just about getting back in order to thrive, it's what were the special messages and how are you going to make that relational moving forward to change the fabric of reality. And that could be success that researchers are trying to figure out, like how is it that someone in those states or have bipolar are successful. Well, there's so many of these different elements that come into play throughout the process. It changes and it repatterns our minds and our brains and our whole bodies, and it's a process that alters our process going forward. So to think how is it that a person's successful, you kind of have to go through it yourself in order to know. Otherwise, you can just pick little bits of abstraction from one's own scientific viewpoint from observable characteristics, just like somebody might think, oh, that person's hallucinating and they're delusional and they're this, yet inside a person might be having the most profound experience inwardly, subjectively, that's repatterning their whole being, yet to the outside looking in, it just looks like a bunch of delusion. So again, a person even observing the success of a person in the end of the process could say, oh, they did this and they did this and then they did this. Well, that would just be abstracting from the surface. That has nothing to do with the actual inward alchemy, the inward alchemania that happens. It has nothing to do with that. So to even spend time abstracting about it is kind of a waste of time. And I wrote this down, that just as human systems create professionals full of knowledge, the universe creates humans full of action. So action is the opposite of knowledge. So knowledge is accumulated thought, and thoughts are inaction. They're precognition. And if a person's studying a book and accumulating this chunk of knowledge, they're sitting there not doing anything for 10 years. And now, since action is way more powerful than that accumulation, if that person at that same point in time would have, say, gone into mania and been completely in a full state of action, and for that same 10 years, this would be a different universe, just with that one person. So we accumulate this knowledge, which is this inaction, which is this collective abstraction, which is just like a heap in the mind. It's a lens through which we see. It's like a professional lens. And instead of actually acting as a human being, we have this ball of knowledge in the way. And then with that ball of knowledge, we look at, say, somebody that has mania and is in that state of action and think, well, how are they successful? It would only make sense that a certain amount of people that are that full of action are able to be successful. We've created a society around people who accumulate inaction as knowledge, as expertise to be successful, and then those people look down on the people that weren't able to accumulate that heap and start like picking them apart and trying to help them because they have the ball of heap in their mind through which to understand all. And I actually feel that this manic energy is necessary for people to go into that state of action in order for the universe to stay in balance, because it's created all these professionals and who have this knowledge, who are in a sense just accumulated inaction. If we took children at 1 year of age or 2 years of age and sat them in front of a book for 10 years, they wouldn't learn a thing. And somehow at some point we decide to be educated and stop being creative and acting. Life is action and mania is life energy. It makes us act. Mania removes the piano tied to our ass. And that's the thing. I think mania has an evolutionary significance. And that's the part that they're missing. They're not thinking of the evolutionary significance of this. They're not thinking of the evolution of consciousness. And they don't like to study consciousness, so no wonder they're not thinking about it in terms of the evolution of consciousness. And also how we're not our egos. That's not who we are. It's like an accumulated... That's the thing. All these studies, they miss that point. And even recovery, it misses the point. We're not the ego. It appears as some kind of illness or disorder because the ego falls apart. But we're not that. And the professionals are employed by thought and knowledge, and mania, manics are employed by the universe. That's the thing. It's the energy of the universe. That is the divine currency. It's the only currency. It's that life energy. If we don't have that, we're dead. And we can have access to more of it if we're not thinking about ourselves all the time. If we're thinking about ourselves, then we're trying to earn money, and then we don't have this energy. And this energy is the new currency. It's actually to be made relational and change how we relate to each other in such a way that money is not as necessary. Thought and ego consciousness is the mental equivalent of being a couch potato. It's like going on over and over, circular, nothing's really changing, nothing's happening, it's stagnant. It's the same stuff over and over again. And mania comes in and removes that couch potato syndrome. And it actually moves us, it gets us off the couch, it gets us moving. And in that state, we're probably more than 500% more productive. So this energy can change someone's life very fast, obviously, and it usually makes a person crash. And in a way, I think of the movie Fight Club, where he just loses everything. It's like, oh no, you lost all your shit, so what? And it's kind of like that too. It's like, oh, you lost everything? Oh well. In mania, we break off from our ego mimetic constellation and we have access to new memes. We're the channel of new memes. We're bringing something new into existence, yet most of it gets lost. Again, epimimetics. Memes that come from somewhere else, that aren't from old memes, from the structure of society, from marketing, from TV. We are the creators of this. We are in a prison of the sounds of other people. And somehow we internalize that and translate it into our own voice and then think that has something to do with our lives. And when we break away from this ego meme thought structure, we have access to more degrees of freedom of our movement and action. We feel free. And this is how children are. This is not a mystery. This is just like removing the dirt from one's glasses and then it's just there. You just didn't know you had dirt on your glasses and that's why you couldn't see. And this is one of the differences I think there is between flow and mania. I got Stephen Kotler's book, The Rise of Superman, and he talked about how flow, for example, in surfing is narrowing of the visual field, and you're so focused that you can't even hear the wave around you because you're so focused on what you're doing. That's flow. And you have to be that focused, because if you're not, you could make a mistake and then die. And I feel like mania is the opposite. It's not riding a wave in terms of, it's not something that's purely physical. So if somebody's doing something that physical, it makes sense that it would be a focus and block out sound, anything that's not necessary. And so in mania, it's the opposite. The ego gets blocked out, and that's not necessary. So when that's not necessary, everything else is available. So I don't actually think there's any sort of thing such as focus per se. The one that focuses is the ego, and the ego is gone, so it's actually completely opening up, and there's nobody there except everything. So the ego is not there, so everything is there. So it's the opposite. Complete opening up of the visual field. The senses are heightened. You don't block out hearing. You hear everything because you are the entire universe at this point. And Alan Watts says you are what the entire universe is doing at this moment and place and time. That's what you are. You are what the universe is doing. So you actually really get with the fact that that's true. And so you are completely open to everything and can focus on anything. You don't just have to focus on your foot on the board on the wave and that's it in this narrow flow field necessary or you're going to die. It's the ego just died. It's gone. And so you have access to everything and you can focus on anything. Your consciousness can go on anything because it's not just on the ego linear thought process. So it's similar, but that's why I feel like mania is a more authentic universe flow experience, because it's flowing with the entire universe. It's being one with the entire energy of the entire universe instead of just being one with a surfboard and a wave, which takes a lot of practice. It doesn't take any practice to be one with the universe. It's just light switch. So I think it's sort of like an equal and opposite phenomena in a way. Like it's on a flow spectrum, but one is like, I have to perfect my body and its movement and position in space and gravity and time in order to be so focused that my ego shuts up. The universe and its energy can come in and shut the ego up, no problem. It can give it a big spanking and it's gone. So, and when that happens, it's disorienting when that whole field opens up because there's no ego there through which to interpret things. And when the ego does come in its fragmented way to try and interpret things, it's not making any sense out of anything, because the ego has nothing to do with the entire universe. And it can come in an attempt to abstract on things, but that isn't congruent with the entire thing. And then the ego usually does come in at some point and make it about itself and how it's so great. And that's the equivalent of starting to focus. That's the equivalent of actually starting to focus with the ego and have it come in to this field and try to identify with bits of it when it has nothing to do with it. But the trouble is that if one gets opened up to that entire field, it's pretty difficult to not have the ego come back in when one's going to be relating with other egos, especially egos that this personal ego already knows. Because if I'm in a state of mania and then I see somebody that I know, they're going to recognize that something's different about me, and they're going to project their crap into my open field. My open field of the entire universe is beautiful, and they come and take a dump on it. And my ego gets mad and it looks a little bit moody, and then, somebody's ill because some ego came in and took a crap on my field of beautifulness here. And then that's the ego again, and that starts to spiral downwards because, again, it has nothing to do with the ego. And that's part of the mood thing, too, is one's ego is trying to tell the other ego, this has nothing to do with me or you. Like, shut up, get out of here. And so it's just a spiral. And then that's usually when it is scary and it's difficult to come back. And then the ego consciousness comes back and totally annihilates that other state of being. So it's almost like the focus of another ego comes in with its hocus pocus and makes a person refocus their ego. I remember my first state of manic consciousness. I found it difficult to be around my parents because it was like, get out of here. So I feel again, like there's nothing you have to do to go into manic consciousness. And you could think of someone's flow experience in a way as a manic consciousness, but not really, because one has to do a lot in order to get there. And maybe one has to do more in order to get there. So again, it's an ego achievement. And anything that's turned into an ego achievement, the person's going to spend 99% of their ego achievement time trying to get into that 1% of flow state where the ego's gone away. So one's reinforcing one's ego by trying to do something in order to get that. And that's ego reward and punishment, and that just reinforces the ego more, the conditioning, all that. So one doesn't actually have to do anything to go into manic consciousness, and one could probably be there a larger percentage of the time. It's difficult to be there all the time because we live within the ego thought meme field. So it is important to have a sense of being in order to function within that field, but it's also good to be able to be in manic consciousness, which is not focus. It's when the focuser is gone. So there's freedom. There's a difference between freedom and focusing. So there's freedom of consciousness where one can sort of allow whatever to arise. And that's the thing with mania too, is you don't really have a choice. What arises, what arises. Just like kids don't necessarily choose. They look around. They just go from one thing to another like a ping pong ball. So there is no choice really. And you could say too, a person surfing a wave in flow has no choice but to be perfect or they're going to die. But again, to me, it's a very narrow band. And I'm not saying there's no value in those things. Of course, that's wonderful and everything. But the good news is a person doesn't have to be a super athlete in order to go into super consciousness. I would almost say it's easier to go into super consciousness if you're not trying to do something super. The one who tries to do something super denies the fact of the supreme. There's obviously something out there that knows more than my ego knows. And in that open field in mania, it's like we're trying to attempt to sort out what has meaning and what matters. But maybe it's all the same. Maybe that's part of the point. It's all the same. It's the ego again that's trying to classify something as better or worse. And with that, can I think to myself, it doesn't matter if I'm in a feeling state of up or down or completely terrified, it's all the same. I think maybe the field of gravity focuses us. Like if we're subjecting ourselves to the field of gravity in that way, we're definitely focused on our body. But if we're in the field of actuality, as we just are naturally as humans in our natural embodiment, not doing anything extreme, we actually need to see the whole field with our peripheral vision. Before we evolved into what we are now, we probably needed to practically see with eyes on the back of our head in order to survive. With our peripheral vision, we can practice looking straight ahead, yet seeing what's over to our extreme left or right. We can see with our peripheral vision, and thinking we really focus is something. I think that's a bit of a leap, saying that we need to focus. We are focused all the time. We're focused on our ego, and we think by focusing on something else, that's going to solve the problem. Maybe the trouble is focusing itself. Thinking that we know something. Thinking about something is seeing it and thinking that we know that. We don't know jack squat. And in those sports states, there's nothing to know. They're not knowing in that state. There's nothing to think about. And then they're in the flow. And in the same way in mania, there's nothing to think about. There is a different level of thinking that comes in for sure. People get very playful with words. Instead of words playing in one's mind, one starts to play with words. One again starts to play. One starts to like create language and make combinations and see connections, and in that way we're playing with language instead of being poisoned by it and being just tape loops of meme viruses. So I think that's part of breaking up the mind virus programming, and it's a different process than some people use extreme sports to break up the mind virus processing from happening all the time. They get out of it for a little percentage of the day, good for them. And the energy of mania, that consciousness is the energy of intelligence. It's a different intelligence. We think of our ego conscious logical mind as intelligence. It's not intelligence, it's programming. And it can appear as intelligence, just like a person in manic consciousness can appear as out to lunch. And again, we're normally in focus. We're focusing on the ego. And if a person is doing some extreme sport and they're focused on what they're doing, because they have to be focused in order to do it, that's like thinking that focus is the important factor. And we could say in our ego mind to focus on a wart, and one could maybe be focused on that, but there's no value in that. So focusing on the ego is like focusing on a wart. And then in the same way, the ego focusing on it is very dissatisfying. It's not life. It has nothing to do with life. We're just focusing on some kind of virus. And that would be like going on our computer just to watch it be overtaken by a virus and not actually being able to use the internet and all the programs and all the software and all the apps. We just sit there and watch the virus chew up the computer. And that's sort of the equivalent of what we're doing by thinking all the time about ourselves and ego and the past and the future and everything. So again, one transfers their focus from the ego consciousness to focusing on the task at hand with something like surfing. And surfing is a lot more satisfying. So it's like, well, that was a nice thing to focus on. It's still focus. And then And it could be less focused because a person has trained themselves so much that, it's the unconscious of just the body reacting to the task at hand. And maybe the ego goes away in that process because it's not really needed for that task at hand. We assume the ego is needed for our daily functioning, but it's not really. We can just use it when it's necessary and then put it away. And so I think that it's about not so much about focus as it is as withdrawing one's attention from one's own ego mind process. Because it's a pretty dissatisfying thing to focus on. That would be like playing the same old cassette tape over and over, when in this day and age now, we have access to every single song any time of the day, anywhere in the world practically, through iTunes and YouTube and whatever apps out there. That would be like, I'm just going to play the same old tape. And we think we are that cassette tape. And it has something, that would be like listening to it and then thinking it has something to do with right now. And then by focusing on it, we get pretty dissatisfied, and then we'd want something else to focus on. Focus is a bunch of hocus pocus. It's about being open, curious, wondering, not knowing, not focused. If we're focused, whatever we're focusing on is what's salient, and it's usually just a bunch of ego garbage. Mania is an opening up, and things unfold through us. Everything is contained within us, and we're here to unfold something. If we are only in our ego process, we are not unfolding what it is that is within us to unfold. And when somebody gets in touch with that, often it's perceived as like special messages, and it feels special, and it seems otherworldly because it's not the ego. But really it's not otherworldly, it's just intuition, gut feeling, the heart. We have so much other energy we can sense, and the heart can beat in a certain pattern and feed us messages to our consciousness that we're upset, or like those are emotions, yet we block it with thoughts usually, and we're not really in touch with what those sensations are telling us. We take it personally and make it into this like wah me story, when it might actually be telling us to get in line with what the universe is wanting us to get in line with. Because maybe if we were actually in alignment with our life path and what we were meant to do here, we wouldn't be so concerned about our own personal little petty desires and emotions and sad stories. So I have a question for you manics out there. In what ways is it safe to be happy, to be silly? It's not really that safe to be really happy out there. And I was thinking about altruism, and I was thinking about manic consciousness and how it animates us. It animates us as adult children. And one of the things that, there's all these traits that children have, like creativity, play, learning. And they're not thinking, I'm being creative, I'm being playful, I'm learning, I'm laughing. That's just how they are. Those are their natural, innate responses. And they get programmed out of us because we get all these more refined morals and things. But I was thinking about how altruism is something they don't have. Like kids don't have a sense of, oh, I want to do good for the world, because they haven't really connected with the world on that level. So I feel like mania in a way restores us to our childlike characteristics, but adds in the dimension of altruism, adds in the dimension of the awareness of others, and that others are suffering and that we could help others. So kids, if we just like let kids wander the earth and they were just the way they are, happy and entertaining and cute and all that, they would change the world, because we would, if they were running around like animals in a way, we'd be like, oh, there's a kid, how cute, and we'd have them as pets and love them. But no, we train them into being adults, and so they lose that. But what I'm saying is that we're restored to that in mania, yet we're added with the altruism, and in that way, we can make those spontaneous social behaviors and make it a positive social contagion, make it relational to affect the world. Because how kids are change the world. They change us with their joy and everything, and then they lose that. We lose that. We are the children. We're not separate from the children, and look what we're giving to them. So I feel like the universe is saying, be like a child again. Oh, who else said that? And be altruistic. And again, I've mentioned before in a different video how it's not be altruistic because you should. It's because when you really connect with that energy, which I believe most of us people that go through manic consciousness do, we see it's all one thing. And it's all one process. We're all one. It's not separate. If we see pain out there, we're in pain. Even if we feel it if we're sensitive. We don't feel it if we're not sensitive. Either way, it has an effect on us, and we just don't have an idea about that. We think, oh, I developed back pain. You don't necessarily know it's because somebody's suffering down the street, and you would think, oh, that's not true. We think of the butterfly effect or ripple effects. We don't really know what causes what, and we make up these causes for things, but there's causes beyond the causes, and a lot of the causes is that we are one consciousness. And then we come back to this perception of being separate again, and then we suffer because it's kind of painful to go back to that afterwards, even though it's painful to be kind of sensitive sometimes because you can feel the pain of other people. But the benefit or the gift of feeling the pain of others is that you realize we're all one and the same. And we probably used to sense things that way and interact with each other feeling the other person's pain. And if you feel it, you kind of feel like you would want to do something, a little bit of something to help with that. So again, it's not altruism because I want to be altruistic. It's because it's one thing. And again, to me, I feel like when a person fully embodies one's mania and is operating that way, one's not thinking I'm being altruistic. It's a concept. It's a concept from the ego vantage point, saying, oh, that's altruistic. But in my mind, like a person in that consciousness and operating in that way is just that way. And it's just like a humble person doesn't even know they're humble. And somebody says, oh, you're really humble. But they're like, what are you talking about? Like, what's humble? They might know the word, but they don't really they're not going around thinking I'm humble. Because as soon as somebody says I'm humble, they're not humble. So that's the thing with the altruism. It's not from a place of trying to be altruistic. And so from my vantage point now of not necessarily feeling 100% sensitive to others, I can perhaps design that altruism into my life. So, I'll either feel sensitive to others again, or I'm in alignment with how I know the universe operates underneath our awareness. And it has to operate underneath our awareness. We can't be aware of every single bit of information all the time. We'd be overwhelmed. We would just burst. So the ego mechanism is a necessary protection to some level. And another thing too is it's with the helping idea. The idea of helping is like not about pity, it's about celebrating with people. Just celebrating the moment people share together, and that is healing more so than pitying people. So I've talked about harvesting one's mania, and you could always think of it too as harnessing one's magical powers. But it's how do you harness the universe? You can't harness the universe. So I actually do feel that mania is like surfing the universe. That energy is like a wave, and it takes us over and animates us, and we are the wave, and we are the universe, and we're surfing that wave. So the wave is coming, and that's the thing with that analogy is embodying one's mania or practicing embodying one's mania is just the same as one practicing riding a wave and surfing. So a person's body and physique gets totally conditioned into being able to ride that wave. Well, the wave of energy of the universe comes, and one can alter one's gestures and motions and ways of being to embody that energy as it animates us that way when it comes. So if we are that way already, we're going to be better at riding that wave and making that energy relational. because as we ride that wave and relate in that way, people are responding to us differently, and that's creating mini waves for the other person to surf by practicing it by watching you. So, children learn by watching each other. So again, this is another way for people to learn, is by watching each other. That's why we have the mirror neuron system. So people are learning even though they don't even realize they're learning. Like, a person can go down the street and say, you should smile, or a person can just smile all the time, and that's like telling people it's okay to smile. So if I wrote a book, it could be called Surfing the Universe. I might start talking about some book titles, because I might write a book, I don't know. But again, that's like sitting around, that's in action. And this is sitting around and in action as well, but I also feel it's not, in a way, because this is action. I'm speaking, and also I'm sharing about this. So if I go out and do something and it's action, and then I come back and I say, hey, I did this action, well, then there's all this stuff leading up to the point where I got to that point of action. So it's me also working towards embodying my mania. And also I write a lot, and so by writing and making it into me speaking, I feel it's sort of upping the energy of it a bit, because speaking's more powerful than just writing. So I could spend 5 years writing and perfecting it, and like going and editing every little word, putting out a book, and maybe like 2 people read it or something. Or I can just be completely open and talk and spend many, many hours doing this, but again, it's on video, and also it's now. So I'm putting dates on the video, so it'll be like, okay, well, this is how this unfolded, and then unfolded to a certain point, and whatever, it just keeps unfolding. And I think that by doing that, my thoughts have sort of gotten to, I don't know, I just feel that it's a way to make it relational. Like, I can make it relational in the form of a book, or I can make it relational in the form of a video. And I'm choosing video also because this way I can make it very easily accessible, and also easily accessible in the way that some people don't like reading. Some people find it difficult to focus and read, and this way it's just in a video. And also I think the energy is different reading the words as opposed to just like the gestures and stuff. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's kind of like an audio biography in real time. I guess it's video blogging is what they call it. So video blog, audio biography, and it's kind of like real time, but it'll be in retrospect. I can imagine myself releasing them. Well, I have a job right now, and I don't want to release them while the job's going on. And then there's another thing I want to do. So, hopefully within a year from now, and I don't know if I'll keep making videos the whole time, but I think I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying being able to take stuff that I wrote and make it a video, and then maybe kind of forget about it, as opposed to thinking, okay, now where is this gonna go in my book, and collecting all this like information. It's way too much for me, I think. So I'm liking the video thing. And also, I just feel like this is a conversation, this is a dialogue with myself, but also with whoever it resonates with, and I invite collaboration and vision sharing, and to me this is about creating context to affirm that there are higher implications to this stuff. And I felt that from the beginning, but it's only now that I'm getting to the point where I can really talk about it. And it's not, I don't think it's anything mysterious. It's like, I think humans are just designed to collaborate and cooperate with each other, and bring out the best in each other, and and really work towards what's best for everybody. I don't think we're designed the way society has conditioned us. And so that's another reason why I want to share openly, in the spirit of, let's just share openly and talk and make context and meaning, and see things differently, and see things in a million different ways, not just this way versus that way, and fighting over opinions and stuff. Let's co-create. We're meant to be creative and learn, and always learning, and so that's again what I want to be as. And the thing too is that I'm finding that my process of learning and insights, it never ends, and it never has this whole time. So if I think, oh, this is the good point of the book, or this is a good point, the next day I have like 20 things I think are good points. So it just gets to be a little bit too much, and maybe none of it's a good point, and that's not the point. The point, again, is just to share and talk and speak openly from a place where it's not about what's written in textbooks. It's just about opening one's mouth and sharing, and inviting others to start thinking again for themselves about stuff, and not in order to turn on this or be mad at that. That's just a waste of energy again. Because that energy of mania, if we were collaborating and putting our visions together, would be more powerful than the need. It would make it unnecessary to so-called fight what is not working, because I think that stuff would more naturally fall away. I wrote down that this world is psychological torture, because when I get into a state of psychosis, it actually feels like psychological torture. But I think that we're all experiencing that from our egos, yet it's sort of a low-grade torture. And then our society is based on logic and rationality, which is quite irrational. And we think it's logical, yet there's an incongruence with that logic and the logic of our hearts. And so we feel that, but we don't even know what we're feeling anymore. We think it's like a personal thing, when we're all feeling that. And I feel that this manic consciousness is the energy that's trying to break our brain-mind away from this psychological torture field. And when we get free from that, and then we have to come back into it, it feels again like hell, because it is hell. And the psychological torture has to do with the morality of society, the rules we're given by which we measure ourselves, which have nothing to do with what it is to be a human being. I think true morality is buried in our hearts, and it's blocked by our minds and our egos, but we still feel it. And this could be a lot of the anxiety that people are feeling. They're like, they don't know where it's coming from. Well, it's just the collective, the society that we've created is incongruent with our hearts. And so we see with our hearts, and then that creates anxiety and a dissonance that feeds up to our brains, that creates these thoughts. And it's all connected. And I think it's the anxiety too of I can't be me, and having the awareness that one's being trained to be a cog in the machine instead of actually being nurtured to thrive. Also, that article by Tom Wooten talks about why do people with bipolar have certain capacities that are more, and then certain ones that are less. Well, I actually think that this energy is coming in to shrink certain human capacities, like the ego capacities, which aren't even human capacities. There's something other. It's like thought, language, viruses that have infected our minds. And so I feel like I feel like when this energy comes, it just naturally shrinks or atrophies these other supposed capacities, which actually are capacities that incapacitate us as human beings. They turn us into good functions, good machines, good robots, but I don't think they make us good human beings. And I feel this energy actually reconnects us with the dimensions that are the dimensions of being human beings, like play, laughter, learning, creativity, energy, fun, all these things that we're born with. And then all the stuff that we're programmed with starts to atrophy, but the stuff that we're born with is just there. So the energy actually like wipes away the ego, but it doesn't really necessarily create something that wasn't already there, because those capacities were already there within us as children. And then maybe they're just a bit more refined because we're adults, but they just seem out of context and inappropriate because we're adults. So it's difficult in that way. And I actually talked about that in a previous video way before I read this article, about how in manic consciousness, in this process, there's an habilitation process. We get habilitated in ways, and then maybe there's a disability in certain ways that are valued by society and part of functioning in society, in the machine that is society. But we're not machines. As kids, we were all over the place, and then it took a while to actually condition us into a very narrow, limited structure of supposedly acceptable behaviors. And then we break away from that as adults if we go into manic consciousness, and then we're seen as like ill or something. We don't see that we are just squashed into this very tiny band. And then we wonder why people can't focus when we're squashing them into this tiny band. The ego blocks us from spreading the memes of celebration, of celebrating living, of playing with words, of being poetic instead of being played on by words. That energy is trying to create a new way of being in society. So there is a balance between being in society and changing society, because I feel these spontaneous social behaviors are what are going to change society, create a new society. We are each society. In the Jane Austen movies, they often say, "Oh, I really like your society," meaning your presence and whatever. So each person had a society in a way. So in that way, if each of us are a society, if we're a society animated by manic consciousness, or embodying our mania and harvesting our mania and practicing our spontaneous social behaviors and our intentional acts of kindness, well, we're going to affect the fabric of society in that way. I feel like this energy is trying to be relational. It's trying to get us to relate in these ways that we behave when we're in this manic consciousness, and it's trying to, in that way, alter society. It's trying to get us to celebrate. It's trying to get us to collaborate. It's trying to get us to cooperate. It's trying to get us to cooperate with the energy and as manics together. And that's the thing. This bipolar is an advantage not just for a person, it's an advantage for society. It could be harvested even if people are in the state. It could be harvested for the good of society, not just by a single person after the fact. Like, this should be something that's seen as important. And if nobody sees that, then I'm going to create the company that harvests mania. Because it's not that personally advantageous. It most often destroys a person. And if there was a way, if people knew that a person going through that was actually an advantage for society, for everyone, then maybe people would actually protect these people and nurture them through the process, and also help them to harvest the meaning of it through the process, and not just... It's an energy that's altogether different from the ego. And the ego might have one eureka moment in 10 years, but this energy can create a eureka moment every 10 seconds. But there's no way to tap into that, because a person it's not harvested for that. And it's a different level of processing that has nothing to do with the person. The person has been turned into like a universal quantum processor, and they're processing not just for themselves but other people too. That's the thing I feel, is that since it's all one thing, and certain people say self-medicate or zone out or tune out or all these things, all these people that are tuning out, that stuff is still going on, but they're tuning it out, or they're zoning out, or they're medicating it out, or eating food to make it go away. It's still there. So that energy is actually going to be going through someone else. And in that way, I feel, it could only be metaphorically speaking that, some people sort of tumble into situations that they wouldn't otherwise. Like, imagine if everyone watching TV was going out and doing acts of kindness for people that need help, then the world would be a different place, right? So in that way, if a person's watching TV to tune out, in a way they're saying, I'm not going to help somebody out there. And that is leaving that person in that place, and they're maybe suffering that extra stuff. The person had the luxury to tune out, and the other person's not able to. Why do people hear voices that are on their own? There's more going on than just I'm this separate person and I'm immune to everything going on out there. It's not how it works. And I feel like a lot of times too, a person who goes into mania not only brings energy into this world, but also has to process some of the crap too on their way back to the world, to the energy level of the world. So it's difficult. Freedom is at the end of the thought that you're thinking and before your next thought. Abstracting about life blocks the flow of energy, and you're not actually in contact with your life energy. So the ego, the prefrontal cortex, shuts off during a flow state in, say, surfing. It's not needed. So why do we need it in daily life? We don't need it in daily life. When manic consciousness comes in, it wipes out the ego, and we're just the wave, and we actually see or we sense that. So if a person riding a wave is starting to think or something, that it's dangerous. Dangerous. Why don't we see it as dangerous in daily life? It blocks the wave. It blocks us from riding the wave, of being one with the wave. We have a matrix of thought that we take to be ourselves. Bipolar is an advantage for humanity. So we need other human beings to support people that are going through the process.